Hey folks, sorry I'm not in school today. I had a prior engagement, but I wanted to make sure that we talked about the homework that was due today, and you can get some feedback on whether or not you were doing things right. When we got together on Tuesday, you folks took notes on this sheet. We reviewed the 4 strategies for finding the x-intercepts or solutions to quadratics, and on the back there were 8 problems, 7 of which you had to decide what the best option was for solving out of 4 different strategies. So I want to make sure that we go over those since I'm not here today. So if you could have the sheet out, if you don't have it, if you could find it in your binder, pause this video and then start playing once you have it. So before we talk about which strategies to use when, it's good to just review what the strategies are. Inspection is a strategy used to find your x-intercepts or your solutions when you only have 2 pieces in your equation. Okay, for example, you might be missing your b piece, the part attached to an x, or your c piece, which is just your constant in that equation. We use greatest common factor if your c is missing. And then if your b is missing, you're going to move your c to the other side of the equation and try to get your x alone by square rooting. All right? That's inspection. Factoring is when we start off by doing a times c and we find those 2 special numbers that multiply to a times c but add to whatever our b value is. Okay? That's a little bit longer process. You have the steps on the other side of your notes. After that, we did completing the square. We've done this a lot, okay? You guys did pretty well on that quiz, so hopefully you remember. In this situation, we need to find our perfect c, so we move over our old c. We half our b and square it, add it to both sides, yada, 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 do some more work, and then get our x-intercepts there. The most new thing is the quadratic formula, which is we find out what our a, our b, and our c are, and we plug them right in. 2 negative b plus or minus b squared minus 4ac over 2a. Each of these strategies has advantages and disadvantages, and that's what we talked about last time we were together. So today we're going to look at equations, which strategy is the best to solve, and then actually go over the answers. And these, again, are the problems on the back side of the notes we took last class. Okay? So you should have this sheet with you. If not, I probably have a couple extra copies in the front of the room. So let's look at our first problem. We have x squared plus 4x plus 4. Equals 0. I can tell you right now, it's not going to be inspection because it has 3 pieces, so that is not an option. Okay? To solve this, I could use maybe any of these 3. I would not choose quadratic formula right now because, if anything, I could factor or complete the square. My advice to you is check and see if factoring works first. So if I do my a times my c, and I'm kind of doing this in my head, I get 4, and I ask myself what 2 numbers multiply to 4 but add to 4. Hopefully you thought of that pretty quickly. If you can come up with those numbers quickly, then you want to do factoring. In this first one, you could have chosen factoring as your strategy, or you could have chosen completing the square. Both of those make a good option for this problem. So if we're factoring, I do my a times c. If I want 2 numbers, add to my b, which is going to be 4. Okay? And those 2 numbers are 2 and 2. 2 times 2 is 4. 2 plus 2 is 4. It works. So I'm going to rewrite my whole equation in 4 pieces, using this and this as my middle chunk instead of 4x. Now I'm going to factor by grouping. Here I'm going to pull out an x, so I'm left with x plus 2. I'm going to factor this, so hopefully I get x plus 2 in here. Out of both of these parts, I can take out a 2 or a plus 2, positive 2. And I'm left with x plus 2. These match, so I'm happy. Okay, that means I did my factoring correctly. Now I'm going to take my outside pieces, x plus 2, set it equal to 0, and then my inside, x plus 2, and set that equal to 0. Subtract and subtract. I get x equals negative 2. Subtract and subtract. I get x equals negative 2. What this means is this equation only hits my x-axis once, and it's at negative 2. Again, this was the first problem in my box. Let's look at the second problem, okay? We have 3x minus 2x plus 5, and we actually have a squared here, equals 0. Now, looking at this, again, it's not 2 pieces, so I cannot use inspection, okay? As far as factoring, I can check it in my head, okay? I do a times c, so 3 times 5 is 15. 2 numbers that multiply to 15, positive 15. and add to a -2. At first I thought 5 and 3, but those add to be 8, and I can't subtract them because I need it to be a positive. Or I could do -5 and -3, then I get -8, so that won't work. I can't think of it quickly, so I'm not going to factor. That is not going to be an option. Now I could complete the square, okay? If you remember, completing the square, we move our c over, we find a new c. But in this one, our a value is 3. So our initial step should be divide everything by 3, and then we're going to have a buttload of fractions. And we don't want that, okay? You guys don't like them. They're honestly not my favorite. I can work with them. But if I can avoid having fractions all over the place, I'm going to avoid it. So that's out of the question. So what's left now is the quadratic formula. That's what you should have chosen for 2. Okay? It's my advice to you. So for quadratic formula, I know this is my a, -2 is my b, and this is my c. So I'm going to do -b. So negative of -2 plus or minus the square root of b squared, so -2 squared, minus 4 times a, which is 3, times c, which is 5, all over 2 times 3. Now I'm just going to simplify this, okay? I know -2 squared is going to be 4. And then I have 4 times 3, which is 12, times 5, which is 60. So I'm at -60 or -60, depending on how you look at that. So I can rewrite this as -2 is +2, plus or minus the square root of 4 minus 60, so it's -56, all over 2 times 3, which is 6. Now at this point, I'm going to look over at my square root. Okay, you only have 8 problems here, so you really do need to take your time and see if you can simplify. I notice a couple things here. One, it has a negative on the inside, meaning I can pull out an I. Okay, so at the very least, I could erase that and put an I right here. Now 56, I'm going to pull it to the side and I'm going to factor it. See if I can come up with some way to simplify this. Well, 56 is even, so I can do 2 and 20, 5, 6, 7, 8. 28 is even, so I can do 2 and 14. 14 is even, so I can do 2 and 7, and that's it. So at this point, this is my bottom layer. I have a pair of 2's I can pop out, and then I have a single and a single. So I'm actually going to have as my solution 2 plus or minus I, oops, just kidding. I said I could pull out a 2, so I should put the 2 in front of my I, and then have a root 14 left, and that's all over 6. Now, we've talked a couple times about being able to simplify things like this. If the number on the outside is even, even, and even, then we can cut everything in half. So this would be simplified even more so, and if you have the 2's, that's fine, to 1, a 1 there, which means I don't need to put a coefficient, and then a 3 here. This would be the answer we would be plugging in or choosing on Khan Academy. Okay? So again, quadratic formula, because our a value is not 1, we don't want to have to handle fractions. And in fact, our answer was imaginary. We wouldn't have been able to factor it anyways. Let's take a look at the other problems. Okay? All right, let's take a look at the next 2 equations. These are the third and fourth one on your sheet. Okay? So here, looking at this, inspection won't work. It's 3 pieces. Factoring, I'm going to check it. A times C, so I'm thinking in my head, AC is -16. What 2 numbers multiply to be -16? So I'm thinking 2 and 8, 4 and 4, but they have to add to be 4. Well, 2 and 8, if I subtract those, it's 6, and 4 and 4, that's not going to work either. So factoring is not an option. I can't think of it quickly, so I'm not going to use it. Okay? Next, I have completing the square. If I look at this and complete the square, my first step has to be to make my A1. I could divide everything by 2. Now, honestly, looking at that, completing the square, everything's even. So when I divide it by 2, it's going to be easy. So this time, I'm going to use completing the square. Okay, completing the square to solve this, because I know I'm not going to end up with any fractions. To review the steps for completing the square, I'm going to divide everything by 2 so that my A value becomes 1. 4 divided by 2 is 2. -8 divided by 2 is 4 equals 0. Now in completing the square, remember, I need to find my perfect C. Okay, so I'm going to move my old C over. I'm going to add 4. Okay? And I'm going to be left with now a 4 here and a blank here. So I'm going to half my B value. Half of 2 is 1. Now I'm going to square that 1, and I get 1. And I'm going to add it to both sides. So what I'm left with now is x squared plus 2x plus 1 equals 5. From this, I'm going to change it into its perfect square form. I needed that c to be able to change it quickly. This, if I put it in its perfect square, is x plus 1. I have a 5 here. Now I'm going to use my square root property to get my x alone. I square root each side, cancel, cancel. I'm left with x plus 1 equals plus or minus the square root of 5. And that can't be simplified at all. So my two solutions now are going to be x equals, I have to minus 1 to get my x alone. So it's going to be negative 1 plus root 5. And then I'm going to have negative 1 again because I subtracted, but this time I'm going to subtract root 5. And those are my two solutions. They're irrational. I can't solve square root of 5, so I just leave it. All right, so let's look at number 4 now. We have this equation, negative 2x squared minus 3x minus 1 equals 0. I notice initially, again, it's not just two pieces, so I'm not going to use inspection. I could do my a times c and see if I can find my special numbers quickly. So a times c, I'm thinking in my head, negative 2 times negative 1 is positive 2. Two numbers that multiply to 2 but add to negative 3, and I know those. Okay, I know that negative 1 times negative 2 is positive 2, and that they're going to add to negative 3. So I'm going to use factoring. If that's not something you would have thought of quickly, then what you need to do is move on to a different strategy. Okay, maybe completing the square, which I wouldn't do because our a isn't 1. Maybe the quadratic formula will end up being what you would have chosen, and that's fine if you chose that, but I would do factoring. So again, AC was positive 2. It had to add to negative 3, and my two numbers were negative 1 and negative 2. So just like with the first one, I'm going to now rewrite it in 4 pieces. I keep my first piece. I'm going to subtract 1x. I'm going to then subtract 2x, and then bring down my c value. I factor by grouping. Okay. Now I'm going to look, what can be pulled out of each of these? Only an x, maybe a negative 1x or a negative x, okay? But I'm just going to pull out an x. I'm left with a negative 2x minus 1. That's fine. Here, I want to get negative 2x minus 1. It's already negative 2x minus 1. I have to pull something out, so I'm going to pull out a positive 1. And I'm left with the same thing. So now I take my outside, and I'm going to set that equal to 0. X plus 1 equals 0. So I subtract 1, I get x equals negative 1. My other solution is going to be whatever on my inside, negative 2x minus 1 equals 0. I'm going to add 1. I'm left with negative 2x equals 1, so I divide by negative 2. And I'm left with a negative 1/2. Okay? If you did quadratic formula, this square root should simplify down to something really nice so that you end up getting negative 1 and negative 1/2 as your solutions. Okay? We're going to do 2 more, and then I'm going to have you start your homework that's going to be due on Monday. Okay? So 2 more, we're going to be in the second column now of your paper. All right, last 2 problems. We're going to do this problem and this one here. So have your sheet out. Those are the 2 we're going to be focusing on. The first one is 4x squared minus 36, and I know initially, I notice it's only 2 pieces, okay? It's missing its b term, meaning that I am definitely and I am only going to use inspection, okay? This is going to be the strategy of choice, okay? I'm going to move my c over here. It's a nice whole number. I'm going to move it over by adding it to each side. Now I have 4x squared equals 36. I'm going to start getting my x alone. I don't square root yet. I'm going to divide by my coefficient. Now I'm left with x squared equals 36 divided by 4 is 9. To get my x alone, I'm going to square root. Okay, so I'm going to square root here and square root there. And I'm left with x equals, and it's not just 3. I know you're thinking 3. It is plus or minus 3. So really our 2 answers are x is positive 3 and x could be negative 3. Okay, that's our 2 solutions. Last one we're going to go over. I'm looking here. It's 3 parts, so inspection's not going to be an option here. Okay? Next, I'm going to look and see if I can factor. I'm going to do a times c is negative 6. Negative 6 is 2 and 3. Neither of that's going to get me a 4. 6 and 1, that's not going to work either. So I can't think of factoring quick. I'm not going to factor. Next I'm going to look, completing the square. I would move my C over, but my A value isn't 1. Now here I could do a couple things. I could divide by -1, and all that's going to do is change my signs. I'm not going to be left with fractions. So if you wanted to complete the square here, that would be fine, okay? But if you didn't realize that, if you said, oh, my A is a negative number, I don't want to do completing the square, you would do quadratic formula, okay? So let's choose quadratic. Again, I would accept either this or this, okay? It doesn't matter to me. So in the quadratic formula, I have to outline my A, which is actually -1, my B, and my C. Okay? Now I'm going to do -B. My B is +4, so -4, plus or minus the square root of B squared, 4 squared, minus 4 times my A, which is -1, times my C, which is +6, all over 2 times -1. Now from here I'm going to simplify what I can. 4 squared is 16 minus 4 times -1 is -4, times 6 is -24. So minus the negative would be a positive. Now you could have done this as -4 times -1 is +4, times 6 is +24. Either way, you should get a plus here, okay? Whether you look at that as a negative or if you bring it up as subtraction. So now this can be simplified to -4 plus or minus the square root 16 plus 24, 20, 30, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, all over -2. Okay, 2 times -1. Now this piece, there's no I because there's no negative under my square root sign, but I can possibly factor my square root of 40. I know it's 2 and 20. I know 20 is 2 and 10. And I know 10 is 2 and 5. So here's my bottom layer. I got a pair of 2's. I'm going to pop one on the outside. I have a single 2 and a single 5. So my answer now is going to be still -4 plus or minus, but I'm going to pop out a 2 from the square root, and I'm going to be left with 10 on the inside, all over -2. Now again, I notice this number, my coefficient, and my denominator are all divisible by 2. In fact, all of them are divisible by a -2 also. So I could divide each piece by a -2. If you gave me this, that would be fine. But it can be simplified more to, if I divide this by -2, I get 2. If I divide this by -2, I get 1, right? So I don't really have a coefficient anymore. Over 10, and this divided by -2 would just be 1. And anything over 1, really, doesn't need to have that denominator. So this is my 2 solutions. 2 plus root 10, 2 minus root 10. Okay? Again, all these strategies you've learned in practice. All these strategies, except for quadratic formula, we've had on a quiz before, okay? And many of you have done pretty well on them independently. But now we need to get to the point where we're choosing which one makes sense for the problem that you're looking at, okay? Here, factoring didn't make sense. I couldn't do it. I didn't know the numbers, okay? Here, it doesn't make sense to do something that's going to take a lot longer when I can just move my 36 over and square root that stuff, okay? What I'm asking you to do for homework now is this sheet. You can see from here it only has 4 problems on it. Each of these problems, you must use a different strategy. You cannot repeat strategies with this, okay? So you're going to pick which strategy. I have them listed at the top. You're going to tell me why you chose it, and then you're going to do the work below to find your x-intercepts. Okay? This sheet is due in class on Monday. I'm going to tell you, Monday we're going to review, and Tuesday we're going to be taking a test on this unit. I'm like 99% sure. Okay? So you cannot space out. If you didn't do this sheet, whatever. Hopefully you wrote down all the work that we just did for those 6 problems, and you're going to study it, or you're going to use this to help you do this now. Okay? You need to be able to do this. This is how I'm going to be assessing you on the test. You'll show me you know all 4 by choosing which one goes where and not repeating it. Okay? So again, this is the sheet. I'll put it up on my homework page in case you lose it or forget it or something over the weekend. So you have access. Do it, do it, do it, do it, do it, so we can talk about it on Monday. Okay? Thank you guys. Sorry again I'm not in class, but I hope you got something out of our flip lesson or something today. Okay? I'll see you Monday. Bye.